Felix Walker's medical notes described a cat with a third eye, its fur exhibiting an oil, slick rainbow, despite the species' supposed extinction. Felix Walker swept the station, outer shell, salt-crusted tiles where coastal waves should be. The salt had crystallized into razor edges, each tile fractured into chalk. Dust gray, the kind left behind by children who'd long since forgotten how to build a home. His broom scraped the surface, a dry rasp like sandpaper on stone. The sound swallowed by the insect buzz. It filled the air, 1,000 tiny wings skittering on glass, vibrating the salt grains into trembling constellations. The buzz intensified as he bent, the sound sharpening to a needle's whisper, a sound so thin it felt like a pinprick on his eardrum, the air itself holding its breath. Wedged in a fissure between two tiles, the key was a sliver of cold metal, 1:100 scale. The miniature house's front door clicking shut with a sharp metallic sighting key as his fingers brushed it. The sound was a tiny door closing in a dollhouse, precise and final. His hand trembled over the key's weight, the metal smooth and unyielding, a ghost of his wife's absence pressing against his palm. The buzz peaked then, sudden, high, pitched, a shriek that made his teeth ache, before fading into the thin mountain air. He pocketed the key, the weight a familiar ache, the cold metal, a reminder of the house they'd built together, now just a memory. The insect buzz faded, leaving only the echo of the keyhole, a single needle drop. The sound was sharp, precise, like a needle falling from a thread. It came from the keyhole, the tiny door clicking shut, sealing the miniature house within. The air hummed with the ghost of the buzz, the salt on the tiles, the weight of absence. The needle drop lingered, a cold echo in the thin mountain air. Felix stood in his kitchen, the room bathed in the sickly glow of the gas lamp he'd left burning overnight. He poured tea into his chipped mug, the one with the faded blue flowers that Evangeline had loved so much. The water gurgled from the kettle's spout like a whispering ghost, each drop a tiny echo of their past life together. The steam swirled as it hit the cool air, coalescing for a moment into something familiar, a face, her face before dissipating into nothingness. His heart lurched in his chest like a pendulum stuck between two beats. He gripped the mug tighter, his knuckles whitening against the porcelain. The tea sloshed over the rim as he fumbled with surprise. The mug slipped from his grasp, shattering on the worn linoleum floor with a sharp footy crack. Porcelain fragments skittered across the room like broken teeth, each one clicking and clacking its way towards some unseen gap. The buzz started again, rising from behind the walls, through the floors, up from the very foundations of the house. It was as if every insect in this godforsaken village had found its way inside, their wings vibrating against the plaster, the wood, the very air itself. The sound sharpened, honing into a high-pitched whine that made his ears ache and his teeth grind together. He stared at the broken mug, steam still rising from the tea pooled around it like a tiny scalded lake. His reflection wavered in its surface, distorted by ripples, but somehow clearer than he'd seen himself in years. The lines etched into his face seemed deeper, his eyes hollower, as if the steam had stripped away all pretense of life. The buzz reached fever pitch, drowning out even the sound of boiling water from the kettle still perched on its burner behind him. It felt like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, 1,000 tiny wings beating against his eardrums, trying to get inside his skull. He stumbled back, away from the broken mug, away from Evangeline's face in the steam, tripping over a loose floorboard that groaned underfoot. His hand reached out instinctively for something solid to grab onto, fingers brushing against cold metal instead. The key still tucked safely into his pocket where he'd left it after finding it on those cursed tiles outside. The buzz dropped suddenly, like someone had thrown a switch, plunging the room into an eerie silence broken only by the ticking of the clock in the hall. Each tick was loud, precise, echoing through the house like gunshots fired at regular intervals. He could feel each one vibrating in his chest, resonating with something deep within him that he didn't want to acknowledge. He stood there for what felt like hours, heart pounding, breath ragged, until finally, slowly, deliberately, as if time itself was moving against its will, the steam began to fog up the tiny window of the miniature house tucked safely inside his pocket. It swirled and shifted, distorting everything beyond recognition. Except one thing. A tiny hand pressed against the glass from within, fingers splayed wide as if reaching out for something just beyond grasp, or perhaps trying desperately to escape. I knelt on the cold linoleum, the chipped tiles biting into the backs of my knees. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light from the high, grimy window. A chalk. Dust ballet against the blackboard gray of the clinic walls. The air tasted of disinfectant and something older, something pressed into the very plaster, a lingering scent of sickness perhaps, or the ghosts of forgotten remedies. I ran a hand along the lower shelves, searching for file 37B Evangeline S records. The wood felt brittle, almost powdery under my fingers. Each touch released a small cloud of the same fine dust, coating my skin in a thin gray film. The buzzing had returned, a low thrumming that vibrated through the floorboards, up my spine. It wasn't the sharp, insistent whine from earlier, but a deeper, more pervasive drone, like a disturbed hive settling into a new, unsettling rhythm. I ignored it, or tried to. Years of cleaning up after others, after their messes and their maladies, had taught me to compartmentalize, to treat the grotesque as simply another task. The body, after all, was just a machine, and machines broke down. Evangeline's breakdown had been different. My fingers brushed against a stack of worn ledgers, their leather covers cracked and peeling. I pulled one free, the spine groaning in protest. The pages within were filled with spidery handwriting, a meticulous record of births, deaths, and ailments. A cough rattled in my chest, dry and rasping. I hadn't bothered with a coat. The air in this village was thin, even for late spring, and the cold seeped into your bones. I continued my search, the buzzing growing steadily, a pressure behind my eyes. It wasn't painful, not yet. But it was distorting. The edges of things seemed to soften, to blur. The lines of the shelves, the angles of the room lost their definition. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, but it didn't help. Everything was becoming muted. The gray deepened, swallowing the light. Then a flicker, a tremor in my vision, like looking through heat. Warped glass. The colors leached away, leaving only shades of gray, then a sudden sickening lurch. The buzzing peaked, a high-frequency shriek that resonated in my skull. My vision fractured, splintering into a million tiny shards. It wasn't a sudden blackout, but a slow, insidious unravelling. The world dissolved into a swirling vortex of gray, the edges of my vision collapsing inward. I tried to focus, to grab onto something solid, but my hands felt clumsy, unresponsive. I reached out, blindly, and my fingers brushed against the cold, rough surface of the wall. The texture was wrong. Not the smooth plaster I expected, but something grainy, almost organic. A wave of nausea washed over me, and I stumbled, losing my balance. The buzzing dropped abruptly, not to silence, but to a low, insistent drone that filled the void where my sight had been. It was as if the sound itself had become the room, the walls, the very air I breathed. My breath hitched in my throat, a shallow, ragged gasp. The only other sound was the frantic hammering of my own heart, a frantic drumbeat against the suffocating silence. I sank to the floor, the cold linoleum a shock against my skin. My body felt heavy, leaden, as if gravity had doubled its pull. I tried to open my eyes, but the darkness was absolute, impenetrable. It wasn't the darkness of a closed room, but the darkness of something deeper, something ancient and vast. I ran my hands over my face, feeling the contours of my skull, the hollows of my cheeks. Everything felt distant, detached. The floor felt strangely uneven, as if the tiles had shifted, rearranged themselves. I tried to push myself up, but my limbs wouldn't respond. They were numb, unresponsive, as if they no longer belonged to me. I was adrift, suspended in a sea of gray, guided only by the relentless drone of the buzzing. My head lolled to the side, and I felt a sudden sharp pain in the back of my neck, a small, insistent pressure, as if something were pressing against my skull. I reached back, blindly, and my fingers brushed against something cold and smooth. A curve, a ridge, something. Unexpected then, nothing. Poof! The heat arrived first, a prickling on the back of my neck, not from the air which remained stubbornly frigid, but within the air, a localized warmth, radiating outward. It wasn't unpleasant, not initially. More like standing too close to a furnace, a dull, pervasive glow against my skin. The buzzing, already a low throb in the floorboards, dropped further, flattening into a resonant hum, a mechanical lung breathing in the walls. It wasn't a sound so much as a pressure, a feeling of being pressed inward. I hadn't moved, not since my fingers brushed against the wall, the texture wrong, unsettling. Now, the heat intensified, blooming across my palm where it rested on the linoleum. It wasn't the heat of contact, but the heat of Kentrin creation, as if my hand were the catalyst for something unfolding. A slow, deliberate warmth expanding, blossoming, the air tasted thin, brittle, like shattered glass. I could feel the dust motes, usually invisible, clinging to the back of my throat, each one a tiny rasp against my tongue. Then, the weight. A subtle shift in the air, a pressure against my chest. It wasn't a physical weight, but a sense of twin presence, say. Something settling into the room, solidifying the heat. I didn't need to see to know it was close. The air itself felt thick, viscous, like wading through honey. The clinic, already a mausoleum of forgotten ailments, felt smaller, constricting. My gaze, or what remained of it, struggled to focus. The darkness wasn't uniform. It wasn't the simple absence of light, but a textured darkness, a swirling gray that seemed to breathe, to pulse. I blinked, trying to force a clarity that wouldn't come. The edges of the room, the vague outlines of the shelves dissolved into the gray, becoming indistinct, ephemeral. A faint, almost imperceptible scent, like burnt sugar and ozone, drifted on the air. It clung to the back of my throat, acrid and sweet. It wasn't the smell of burning, but the smell of Tumby becoming this chemical reaction, a transformation. The buzzing, now a deep subterranean rumble, vibrated through my teeth. I could feel it in my bones, a low, insistent tremor, and then I felt it, the cat. Not a physical touch, not yet, but a shift in the heat, a localized surge. The warmth on my palm flared, almost searing, then focused, intensified. A pressure against the back of my hand, a small, insistent weight. I tried to pull away, but my muscles wouldn't respond. My arm felt leaden, unresponsive. Slowly, deliberately, something brushed against my skin. A velvety texture, a delicate rasp. The heat intensified, radiating from the point of contact, a furnace-bright glow against my palm. I could feel the shape of it, small, compact, a weight that defied its size. The air crackled with static, raising the hairs on my arm. I risked a small movement, tilting my hand slightly, and there it was, pressed against my palm, a third eye. Not a fleshy growth, not a tumor, but a perfectly formed eye. Obsidian black, the pupil a pinpoint of molten glass. It didn't blink, it didn't move. It simply stared. A heat, haze shimmered around it, distorting the gray darkness. The air grew hotter, the buzzing escalating into a low rhythmic throb, the sound of a furnace breathing. The clinic walls groaned, a low, mournful sound, as if the very structure was straining under the pressure. The scent of burnt sugar intensified, cloying and sweet, filling my nostrils, coating my tongue. It tasted like regret. The heat on my palm built, unbearable now, a searing brand. I could feel the skin of my hand prickling, tightening. A bead of sweat trickled down my forehead, stinging my eye. The third eye, unblinking, burned into my palm, a concentrated point of heat, of energy, of something. Alien, the buzzing reached a fever pitch, a resonant drone that filled my skull, obliterating all other sound. The heat intensified, consuming everything, searing, branding. My hand trembled, spasmed, unable to pull away. The gray darkness swirled, coalesced, focused on the point of contact. Then, a final agonizing surge. A flash of white-hot light, a searing pain, and the smell of burning flesh. The heat burns. I followed the sound, a thin, keening wail, past the chipped enamel of the wash basins, the stained porcelain cold even through my gloves. It wasn't a child's cry as much as the front shape of one, distorted, stretched thin across the stone of the clinic's foundation. The buzzing, a constant companion these last weeks, had settled into the walls, a low thrum against my teeth. It felt less like sound now, more like the building itself vibrating, preparing. The cry originated from the west wall, the one bordering the abandoned wing. I hadn't been in there in years. Dampness clung to the air, a chill that seeped into my bones despite the furnace's futile attempts at warmth. The linoleum, patterned with a faded floral design, felt slick beneath my boots. Each step a muted squeak, a protest from the aging floor. I pressed my ear against the brick, the rough texture abrasive against my skin. The sound was clearer here, a fragile, desperate plea. It didn't quite come from within the wall, not exactly. It was as if the wall itself was resonating, amplifying a sound that originated elsewhere. My hand rose almost involuntarily. A fist formed, the knuckles white against the gray brick. The plaster was crumbling, flaking off in dust motes that hung suspended in the stagnant air. I hesitated. It felt foolish, childish, to punch a wall. But the cry, it was a persistent ache, a splinter beneath my skin. I swung. Furcrack. The sound wasn't solid, not the clean break of stone. It was muted, swallowed by the wall itself. Mortar crumbled, showering my hand with gritty dust. The buzzing spiked, a sudden, violent tremor that rattled my teeth. More cracks spiderwebbed across the brick, widening with each passing second. The air grew colder, the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic, rising from the fissure, and then the hand. Not reaching, not grasping. It was Suva there, pressed against my wrist from behind the wall. Small, icy, the skin paper thin. It wasn't a hand as I understood it. It was the impression of one, the ghost of a hand formed from the cold, porous brick itself. The cry stopped, abruptly, cut off mid-wail, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. The buzz stuttered, fragmented, like a broken gramophone record skipping on a worn groove. It wasn't a cessation of sound, but a distortion, a bending of the frequency. The vibration lessened but didn't stop. It pulsed irregularly, a weak, erratic heartbeat. I tried to pull my arm away, but the hand-third impression held firm. It wasn't a forceful grip, not a struggle. It was a static lock, a frozen connection. The brick around the hand was frigid, radiating a cold that seeped into my bones, numbing my fingers. I could feel the texture of the wall now, not the rough abrasion of the brick, but the slick, almost oily smoothness of the impression. It felt alive. Not in a biological sense, but in a way that defied explanation. The wall was sweating, a thin film of moisture coating the brick around the hand. It wasn't condensation, it was something else, something viscous, cold and faintly luminous. My gaze, or what remained of it, struggled to focus. The gray darkness seemed to deepen, to coalesce around the point of contact. The edges of the room, the vague outlines of the discarded medical equipment, blurred, dissolving into the gloom. The air tasted of nothing, a complete absence of taste, a void. It felt as if my mouth had been filled with cotton, suffocating the senses. The hand tightened not with force, but with a subtle shift in pressure. It wasn't a grip, but an effusion, as if the brick itself were clinging to my skin, becoming a part of me. The buzzing, now reduced to a faint rhythmic throb, felt like a pulse against my wrist, a slow, deliberate beat. I didn't dare move, not because of fear, but because of a strange, unsettling curiosity, a sense of inevitability. I was frozen, not from the cold, not from fear, but from something far more profound. A stillness that settled into my bones, a cessation of will. The hand, cold, impossibly cold, held me. The wall, silent, watched, and I waited. The silence stretched, thin and brittle, threatening to shatter. The air itself felt brittle, ready to break. The buzzing stopped. A complete, absolute silence. The wall's cold seeped into my bones. The cat, a skeletal shadow against the dust motes, didn't resist the drag. Its third eye, a milky pearl set in the fur above its brow, tracked the telescope with a disconcerting stillness. The buzzing, a low thrum against my teeth, stuttered, fractured. It wasn't a cessation but a disruption, like a swarm of insects momentarily startled by a sudden breeze. I hauled the instrument across the linoleum, the squeak of the floor a brittle counterpoint to the erratic vibration in my skull. The air, thin and frigid, tasted of nothing. A void. The telescope stood on a rickety tripod in the center of the observatory, a circular room choked with the scent of decay and dried resin. The glass of the dome was clouded with grime, letting in only a pallid gray light. I adjusted the lens, the gears grinding with a mournful protest. The moon hung in the sky, a familiar presence, yet wrong. It wasn't silver. It was black, a perfect absolute void against the inky canvas of the night. The cat settled at my feet, a silent sentinel. Its fur rasped against the floor as it shifted, a sound that amplified in the stillness. I peered through the eyepiece. The blackness wasn't empty. It was textured, a swirling vortex of nothingness, subtly patterned with something I couldn't quite grasp. It felt like looking into the heart of a dying star, or perhaps something far worse. The buzzing escalated, a frantic tremor that resonated in my bones. It wasn't in my ears anymore. It was suffined within me. My hand trembled, blurring the image. I focused, forcing myself to see. The black moon seemed to fractive, to bend the void, pulling something from the depths of its nothingness. A flicker, a suggestion of form, something vast and impossibly old. I recoiled, stumbling back, the tripod rattling violently. Snap. The sound was sharp, clean, like a twig breaking. It echoed in the observatory, then reverberated through the clinic, through the very stone of the foundation. The buzzing exploded, a cacophony of 1,000 whispers, a chorus of voices just beyond the threshold of comprehension. They weren't words, not exactly. They were impressions, emotions, anxieties, all colliding and swirling within my mind. I pressed my hands against my temples, a futile attempt to block out the auditory assault. The cat hissed, a low, guttural sound, its third eye glowing with an unnatural intensity. The whispers intensified, a suffocating tide of sound. I felt a pressure in my ears, a sensation of my skull expanding, threatening to fracture. The observatory seemed to shrink, the walls closing in, pressing against me. The air thickened, becoming viscous, clinging to my skin. My vision swam, the grey light of the dome distorting into swirling patterns. The black moon, still visible through the eyepiece, seemed to pulse, to breathe. It wasn't just a void, it was something unalive. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come. My throat felt constricted, choked by the weight of the whispers. I swayed, disoriented, the floor tilting beneath my feet. The cat emitted another hiss, a warning, but I couldn't process it. The whispers were all consuming, drowning out everything else. The black moon seemed to draw me in, to beckon me towards the void. A wave of nausea washed over me. I tasted something acrid on my tongue, a bitter, metallic. My knees buckled. I fell to the floor, the telescope clattering against the stone. The whispers reached a crescendo, a deafening roar that threatened to shatter my sanity. The cat arched its back, its fur bristling, a silent scream of defiance against the encroaching darkness. Then, as abruptly as it began, the noise ceased. A vacuum of silence, a profound, unsettling absence. The black moon glowed in the telescope. The cut stung, a dull ache blooming on my palm. Not from the glass, I realized. The well water was colder than it should have been, a frigid shock that didn't quite register as temperature. It was the absence of it, a sucking coldness that stole the warmth from my hand, creeping up my arm. I lowered it deeper, past the slick stone, seeking some palliative, seeking, what relief? It wouldn't come. The buzzing had ceased, not faded, but T-stopped as if someone had thrown a switch. A silence so complete it pressed against my eardrums, a weight heavier than the stone of the observatory itself. I cupped the water, bringing it to my face. The surface, usually rippled from the constant drip of condensation, was perfectly still. A black mirror, not my face. Not the hollow cheeks, the grey stubble, the exhaustion etched around my eyes. Above my brow, nestled in the hairline, was a third eye. Not a bulge, not a growth, but a perfect pearl, milky and opalescent, staring back at me with an unsettling emptiness. It wasn't my eye. My breath hitched. I blinked. The reflection didn't waver. The pearl eye remained, a cold alien presence superimposed over my own features. A phantom limb of perception. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again, expecting the illusion to break. It hadn't. The water, the stone, the faint chalky light filtering through the grime-coated dome serving, all remained. But the reflection, it was shifting. A flicker, a distortion in the blackness. A face forming, not replacing mine, but to behind we. It a woman's face. Her lips curved in a sad, knowing smile. The lines around her eyes, the ones I'd memorized during years of shared silence, were achingly familiar. I reached out, my fingers trembling, wanting to touch the reflection, to confirm that this wasn't a trick of the light, a fever dream. My fingertips broke the surface. The water rippled, but not as water should. It didn't spread, didn't flow. It consumed Anya's face, the fleeting ghost of her smile began to dissolve, the edges of her features blurring, fracturing like a photograph submerged in acid. Her eyes, usually warm and brown, darkened, becoming hollow pits of the same absolute blackness as the moon. I gasped, snatching my hand back. The water stilled again, the surface once more a perfect, unblemished mirror, but Anya was gone. Erased. The third eye, Femi third eye, stared back at me, unblinking. The silence fractured, not with a sound, not with a crash, but with a return, the buzzing. Fainter now, a ghost of its former intensity. A tremor that resonated not in my ears, but in the bones of my skull. It was a pressure, a tightening, a sense of something, uncoiling. I looked back at the telescope. The black moon, suspended in the void, hadn't changed. But the edges of the blackness seemed to breathe, to expand, contracting and expanding in a slow, deliberate rhythm. I lowered my gaze to my palm. The cut, barely visible before, was widening, deepening, as if something beneath the skin was pushing outwards. Not blood, not pus. Something darker. Something viscous. Something that tasted of nothing, of the void. The air grew colder, not with the bite of the winter air, but with a coldness that originated from within the observatory, a frigid exhalation from the stone itself. The cat, a skeletal shadow against the grey, shifted at my feet. The rasp of its fur against the stone floor wasn't a sound, but a vibration. It wasn't moving closer, but 20 me, a warmth radiating from it, a heat that felt wrong. Not comforting, not natural. It was the heat of a furnace, the heat of something burning. I wanted to look away, to break the gaze of that third eye, but I couldn't. I was frozen, suspended in the silence, watching my wife's face dissolve, watching the black moon breathe, watching the darkness claim everything. The water, still and black, held no reflection, only the void. The chill was a physical thing pressing against my skin, heavier than the damp sea air. I held the cat, its fur coarse against my fingers, a tremor running through its thin frame. The observatory, the telescope, the third eye, all of it felt distant, receding into a memory already beginning to fray. The village behind me, a cluster of greyed stone and weathered wood, seemed to lean into the wind, bracing itself against a storm that only I could feel. The shore was a smear of slate and shale, the water the color of old chalkboards. Each step crunched on the loose stones, a brittle counterpoint to the relentless hiss of the sea. I didn't look back. There was nothing to see but the grey, the wind, and the growing certainty that I was walking toward something I shouldn't. The cat stiffened in my grip, its skeletal ribs pressing against my palm. A low, guttural vibration rumbled in its chest, not a purr, but a resonance, a sympathetic tremor echoing something deep within the stone beneath my feet. The buzzing, the constant, insidious thrum that had become the soundtrack to my existence, had ceased, not faded, stopped. A sudden, absolute silence that amplified the roar of the waves. I knelt, the cold seeping through my trousers, and lowered the cat toward the water. It didn't resist, didn't struggle. Just stared at the grey expanse with eyes that reflected the bleak sky. I felt a flicker of something, a phantom warmth in my chest, a ghost of the compassion I hadn't realized I'd lost. A lie. It was the cat's heat, radiating outwards, a deceptive comfort. "Go on," I murmured, the words snatched away by the wind. It didn't react. I released its grip. The water didn't splash. It didn't ripple, didn't break. It simply sucked. The cat vanished, pulled beneath the surface with a swift, silent efficiency that defied physics. No disturbance, no froth, no sign it had ever been there. Just the grey, implacable sea. The color bled from the world. The grey of the sky deepened, becoming a monolithic, suffocating slate. The grey of the village faded, losing its texture, its detail, until it became a featureless, monochrome backdrop. The grey of the shore intensified, swallowing the light, erasing the horizon. The buzzing didn't return. There was only the wind, a mournful keen that seemed to emanate not from the air but from the stone beneath my knees. The silence, absolute and profound, pressed against my skull, a physical weight. I felt emptied, not sad, not frightened, but emptied. As if something essential had been drawn out of me, leaving a hollow shell. I tried to blink, to clear the grey film that seemed to have settled over my eyes. Nothing changed. The world remained a monochrome canvas, devoid of warmth, devoid of color, devoid of hope. I reached for my face, my fingers brushing against the stubble, the cold, dry skin, the third eye. I couldn't see it. The silence fractured, not with a sound but with a sensation, a tightening, a constriction in my chest, a pressure building behind my eyes. I wanted to look up, to scan the sky, but my gaze remained fixed on the grey water. I felt a compulsion, an irresistible urge to step forward, to wade into the monochrome abyss. My legs moved without my volition, carrying me toward the water. The cold bit at my ankles, then my calves, then my thighs. It wasn't painful, just insistent, a steady, relentless pull. I didn't fight it. What was the point? There was nothing left to fight for. The water reached my waist, then my chest. It didn't choke, didn't sting. It simply enveloped me, a cold, grey embrace. I looked down, expecting to see my reflection. There was no reflection. Only the grey, the infinite grey, swallowing the light, swallowing the world. The sensation of the water rising was not a feeling of drowning. It was a dissolving, a merging, a cessation. I felt my edges blurring, my form losing definition, becoming one with the grey. The pressure behind my eyes intensified, a final, crushing weight. Then, nothing. The village was gone, not collapsed, not sunk, dissolved, as if the grey had simply absorbed it. The slate grey of the sky, the grey of the sea, the grey of the sea, the grey of everything. I stood on the edge of it, the cold seeping into my bones, the wind a rasp against my skin. The telescope shards lay scattered around me, glittering like obsidian teeth, the buzzing. It returned. Not a gentle thrum, but a frantic, insistent vibration that rattled my teeth. It emanated from the shards, a chorus of mechanical insects trapped within the fractured glass. Each fragment pulsed with a faint internal light, a sickly luminescence that fought against the monochrome gloom. It resonated with something deep within me, a forgotten frequency that triggered a phantom ache behind my eyes. My wife's sigh. I heard it woven into the buzzing, a fragile, ephemeral sound, not a lament, not a regret. Just a sigh, a letting go. It wasn't audible in the conventional sense, but a pressure against my eardrums, a phantom vibration that resonated with the shards. I pressed my hands against my temples, trying to silence it, to blot it out, but it persisted, a mournful counterpoint to the mechanical drone. The ground felt wrong, not solid but porous, as if the stone itself were dissolving into the grey. I took a tentative step, and the shale crunched beneath my boots, a brittle, unsettling sound. Each footfall seemed to trigger a ripple in the monochrome landscape, a fleeting distortion of the horizon. I tasted dust, dry and bitter, clinging to the back of my throat. The air itself felt heavy, thick with the weight of the grey. I knelt, the cold biting through my trousers, and examined the shards. They were perfectly smooth, perfectly sharp, reflecting the grey sky with an unsettling clarity. Each fragment seemed to contain a miniature version of the moon, but twisted, distorted, a mockery of the celestial sphere. The light from within pulsed, a slow, deliberate rhythm that echoed the buzzing in my ears. The air around the shards grew colder, a localized pocket of frigid stillness within the grey expanse. My fingers traced the edges of a particularly large shard. It felt warm, an anomaly, a pocket of heat radiating from the cold grey world. The buzzing intensified, coalescing into a single, piercing whine. My wife's sigh returned, louder now, sharper, laced with a hint of amusement. I recoiled, a tremor running through my body. The memory surfaced unbidden, unwelcome, her laughter. Not the warm, comforting sound I remembered, but something brittle, hollow, echoing in the sterile air of the observatory. She'd been fascinated by the telescope, by the distorted images of the moon. She'd called it her window to the other side. I'd warned her, of course, told her it was a faulty instrument, a trick of the lenses. She hadn't listened. She never did. The ground shifted again, a subtle tremor that sent a wave of nausea through me. I looked down, expecting to see a crack, a fissure in the stone. Instead, I saw nothing. Just the grey, the infinite grey, swallowing the light, swallowing the world. The buzzing reached a fever pitch, a deafening roar that threatened to shatter my skull. My vision blurred. The grey seemed to press closer, to suffocate me. I stumbled, catching myself on a shard of the telescope. The metallic tang of blood filled my mouth. I tasted copper. I spat, the grey spittle dissolving into the monochrome landscape. The humming shifted, a subtle change in pitch, as if the shards were singing. A new sound emerged from the shards. A whisper. Not a voice, not exactly, but a susurrus, a rustling of something unseen. It spoke my name. Felix. Felix. It wasn't malicious, not threatening, just acknowledging a recognition, a confirmation. My wife's sigh intertwined with the whisper, a chorus of grey voices swirling around me. The shards began to vibrate violently, the internal light intensifying, bathing the landscape in an eerie, pulsating glow. The grey deepened, becoming a monolithic, suffocating presence. I felt a pressure building behind my eyes, a crushing weight that threatened to overwhelm me. The ground beneath me dissolved, and I fell, not into the grey sea, but into something deeper, a darkness, a void, a silence more profound than any I had ever known. The buzzing faded, the whispering ceased, the grey receded. I was suspended in nothingness, adrift in an infinite expanse of something that wasn't grey, something that wasn't anything. Then, a sound, a single, sharp, metallic click, a needle dropping. I fumbled the medical notes from my pocket, the paper brittle as dried leaves. The ink bled where my thumb pressed it, a smear of red, like old blood. Third eye, not a mark, but a key. The cat's vertical slit of black glass had watched me from the shadows of the dissolved village, its gaze cold and calculating. Now, the air thickened, not with moisture, but with a dry, oppressive heat that clung to my skin like a second layer of sweat. It wasn't warmth. It was the scent of overheated metal, the smell of a forge left unattended. The buzzing intensified, sharpening into a needlepoint vibration that drilled into my molars. Each shard of the telescope's black moon pulsed in time with it, the internal light flaring like a dying star. I held my palm up, the back of my hand facing the glass. The reflection wasn't the distorted moon. It was my own skin, the lines of my life etched in the darkness. The sea roared without water, a sound like stones grinding against stone, and the grey ocean swallowed the last remnants of the village. The ground dissolved beneath me, not with a crack, but with a slow, viscous seep like ink in water. I tasted copper, the metallic tang of blood I hadn't spilled, and the medical notes slipped from my fingers, falling into the void. The reflection in the shard shifted, my palm now a perfect replica of the black moon, and the cat's third eye stared back, unblinking. The sea's roar became a single high-pitched scream, a sound that split the air like glass. I pressed my hands against my temples, trying to silence the buzzing, but it coiled around my thoughts, 1,000 insects trapped in a cage. The heat grew unbearable, a physical weight pressing down, and I saw the village not as it was, but as it had been, my wife's laughter echoing in the sterile air, her voice brittle as broken glass. The shards trembled violently, their internal light flaring like a camera flash. The sea's roar faded into a single, deafening silence. I felt the reflection in the glass shift again, my palm now a mirror of the black moon, and the cat's third eye blinked. Then, the sea swallowed the last wave. The air grew still, thick with the scent of ozone and old dust. I knelt, the cold seeping through my trousers, and traced the edge of a shard. It was warm, a pocket of heat in the gray. The buzzing ceased. The reflection of my palm vanished. The sea's roar returned, but distant like a memory. I looked up, expecting the gray sky, but saw only the void where the village had been. The air was silent, heavy, and then drop.